What makes the woods so terrifying? Perhaps it's the darkness that engulfs everything, or maybe it is the sheer feeling of something lurking that is watching you. Well, tonight, I'm going to be sharing with you 4 eyewitness encounter stories submitted to me from viewers just like you. But before we get into today's stories, go ahead and smash that like and subscribe button because I release storytelling of the mysterious and supernatural every other day, or at least try to. Let's do it. Our first story is brought to you by Alex. And Alex had thought long and hard about putting this down, and since only recently discovering my YouTube channel, that he finally has a fair shot of telling his story without judgment. Afghanistan is an ancient place, and we got home, he began to pursue a degree in history. He could remember his professor describing its ancient tribal landscape, vast mountain ranges, lush river valleys, vast deserts, and of course the nomadic Bedouin people. Then the professor looked at Alex and asked him if he had gotten that right. His professor told him, "After all, you've been to Bactria," and he should have known, but that region has been inhabited since 2500 BC, and the Bedouin people still live there precisely as if the world had passed them by to this day. If time could pass humans by, what else could slip through the cracks? He saw incredible things when he flew over that country as an army helicopter crew member. Castles were standing tall and proud, still waiting to hold off sieges that would never come. And at the base of the outer walls was a junkyard of 100 T-55 and T-64 battle tanks. To a person who grew up in the Midwest, it is, in a word, surreal. Alex was walking back to his barracks after a midnight chow. Listeners who have been to this place will know the Flightline Chow Hall on the far side of the KAF. Those big fist-sized gravel rocks shifted with every step until he had slipped into the alley where the gravel was much finer. And to his right was a big berm running from the chow hall down to the road where a bridge and a gated compound turned barracks for the flight crew. On his left was razor wire topped fencing, and inside was one of the many fuel depots that looked like a poor man's swimming pool. Alex was exhausted, having just completed a 9-hour mission taking him from Kandahar down into the Helmand Valley and eventually out to Herat, moving incredible amounts of cargo. It was very physically intensive work, and he wanted to go to bed. He remembers the moon was out that night, shining bright enough that he did not need to use a flashlight to check his path for snakes or any other pests. Alex could see what they had called a 3-mile mountain, clearly a darker patch in the otherwise bright night sky. He had jumped it hearing the fence to his left rattle, making him stumble back a bit as he looked around for what had caused the noise. He cursed when he saw that it was just a cat running through the circular razor wire like some hamster tube. He kept his distance because you never really know what kind of bugs or pests the local wildlife carried, but he saw that it was staring at something. Now, Alex had grown up with cats, of course, like many of us, and knew what a cat looked like when it was afraid. And it was clear as day that this cat was terrified. And so he turns to look where the cat was looking up at, and his breath was caught in his throat literally, because standing there at the top of the berm was a figure. Now, this was a pretty dark part of the base, but the distant lights and bright night gave Alex a silhouette to work with. His first thought was, this is the largest dog I've ever seen. I mean, easily dwarfing the most giant breed of dogs like Great Danes or large Mastiffs. I mean, this had to be a wolf. What else could it be? Wild dogs sometimes slip in under the fences, so why not? Now, Alex's hand went to his service pistol, his mind wondering what he should do, and he was at the midway point, and it was less than 10 to 15 yards away from him. The moment his hand touched his pistol, its head snapped to him, freezing him in place. It stood up with almost deliberate slowness, causing Alex to look up at this thing while it cast its shadow over him, and it glowered with eyes glinting like an animal in a flashlight. Alex went from concerned to terrified in a matter of moments as they exchanged glances. Then, suddenly, from behind Alex, the cat let out a yowl and jumped through the barbed wire down onto the alley floor, sprinting away. The motion was enough to snap his head towards the cat before he realized his mistake, and snapped back to look at this thing. It was gone. He had never run so hard in all of his life, sprinting for the hardened concrete shelter of his barracks as he crossed the remaining mile, and change, stumbling through those thick fist-sized gravel rocks as he slammed himself face first into the gate of the compound, rolling over and expecting to get torn to shreds right up against it. But under the light of that lone street lamp, he saw only the dark entrance to the alley and the bus stop. He was alone. He went inside, took a warm shower, and then got into bed, determined that what he had seen was just his fatigue. He awoke a few hours later, and something warm and furry was rubbing against his face, vibrating like a small engine. He grumbles, waking up unhappily before he goes into full panic mode, leaping from his bunk, swearing and exclaiming. He finds his light, turns it on, and stared in bewilderment. It was the cat. It looked up at Alex with its unkempt matted fur and gave him a meow. To this day, he still doesn't know how it slipped past the 2 passcode lock-protected doors and found him of all these sleeping soldiers. He picks it up, holding it away so it couldn't claw or bite him. He takes it outside, lets it free again, and the cat is just acting just as docile as can be in his hands, until its paws touch the ground again, sprinting into the night. It would be the last time he ever saw the cat. Now, he doesn't know if the base pest control got a hold of it or if that was a thing of its own. In a month, he was moved to the other side of the base, and the built-up side with many more people, and then a month after that, he was on a plane home. He still doesn't know what he saw that night. The first thing that had come to his mind at the time was, of course, a werewolf, but still, when he had researched the local folklore, ancient Afghani stories talked about a race of giant men, like the tribe that Goliath had descended from, living in the caves that made fighting the Taliban so tricky. Supposedly in the Kandahar in 2002, an entire squad had been wiped out by one of these giants, only for a ranger platoon to bring the creature down in the search for the missing team. They were never found, and the rangers lost 2 men before the giant of Kandahar had died. In either case, Alex considers himself fortunate that whatever it was far more interested in his feline friend than him that night. As far as the giant of Kandahar, that is to be debated. Story 2. Submitted by a girl named Mallory, and she tells us that at the age of 6, she would frequently go with her grandmother weekly to a traditional gathering of elders, telling the tales of their lives, stories, and the history of their people. She described that her culture was native, but never went into detail of what tribe. One story had stood out to her because it showed her the truth of the story. It all began with a man that would remove his skin at night and become a wolf-like creature that would supposedly go on the roof of a pregnant woman's house right above where this girl's mother slept, and did some chanting that would cause the baby to perish in the womb. The creature would take their life force, which would give him longer life and help him retain his youth. This has been going on for years, apparently. The elderly tried to find someone to help them, but no one believed them. The elderly women, specifically, said this man was much older than them, but did not look like it, and they needed help to get a hold of his skin, or need someone to put some herbs on his skin, making it impossible for him to return to it. And if the sunrise found him without his skin, he would perish. The elderly women took Mallory to his home, and had showed Mallory him taking his skin off. The houses did not need siding, they are simply boards put together for a home, so if any of those boards have knot holes, you could see inside. And this gentleman's house had many knots in the wood. The older adults brought her to his home and showed him, and they returned to the area where he met and did their fireside chants. When they saw him heading towards the town, the ladies would bring Mallory and show Mallory what he was doing as he was heading back. Each lady would stay about 10 feet apart to alert her if he was coming back, while someone kept eyeing the gentleman while he applied the herbs to his skin. The gentleman came home before sunrise to get his skin, finding he could not touch the skin or put it back on. He began screaming and roaring, which sounded a lot like a wolf and lion mixed. As the sun rose, he and his home caught on fire and burned to the ground. No longer were the ladies that were pregnant lost their babies. At the time, they did not know what a werewolf looked like, but today, Mallory does, and that is what he looked like to Mallory. Now, this story is interesting and reads more like a folklore or a legend, but due to the way it was written and the little information I was given, I find the story interesting to say the least, and I know that on many tribes' lands there's all sorts of crazy things going on in regards to black magic, shape-shifting, and the likes of that. Personally, I feel like a little more context would really benefit the validity of this story, but it definitely makes you think and wonder of all the circumstances surrounding situations like this one. Our third story is brought by a man named Ozzy. Now this happened over 2 days. September 4th, 2019. At 9:55 p.m., it was dark and Ozzy's father and him were carrying groceries into the house. They were out late and grabbed the groceries last before heading home. Ozzy's dad's property is large, 19 acres, that's all woods, and it isn't fenced in by barbed wire and razor wire. Ozzy was bringing the last few bags inside when he noticed some eye shine under a tree branch from a large tree situated in the backyard. Initially, he dismissed it thinking it was a deer or possibly coyotes, since there are a lot of them on the property anyway. It wasn't until Ozzy's father came outside and noticed that Ozzy was kind of taken aback by the eye shine. The tree branch it was under was almost 9 feet from the ground. It's the lowest branch on the tree due to them trimming. They stayed outside and started to watch it. Ozzy's dad grabbed a small rock and threw it in the eye's general direction. Unlike a deer, it did not flinch at all and kept its eyes locked on them. Ozzy's father and him are very well aware of all the native animal species in eastern Tennessee and has hunted just about all of them. They weren't scared of it, but neither was it scared of them. So Ozzy's dad informs him to go run inside and grab the pistol now. He runs in and Ozzy owns a Smith & Wesson MP9 Compact M2, 9mm pistol. He comes back outside, shoots 6 feet to the creature's right. He did not want to hit the animal, not knowing what it was. Cougars are native there and are illegal to kill, and the possibility of it being a cougar that climbed the tree was in the back of his head. Just like when his dad threw the rock, it didn't move. And so after that, he tells his dad, "Get your spotlight and shine it out there at it." He proceeded to go inside and grab it, and when he came out, turns it on, and as soon as he turns it on, the eyes vanished. He shined the light towards the branch, and they saw it briefly as they did. Tall and muscular with a coat of black hair on it, walking away upright in a bipedal stance. 3 strides covered a 25 feet opening between the trees and the woodline. The strides happened so quickly and fluid that he could not get a good shot off with his pistol. He fired 3 more consecutive shots in that direction anyway, and after the final shot, they both, Ozzy and his father, heard a deep, guttural yell. Almost demonic, but also felt human. You felt the ground rumble as it moved and yelled. Thinking he possibly shot it blindly, he grabs the spotlight and his father and him went to the area it was at. There were no blood or any signs of them wounding it, just shrubbery that was pressed down from it moving through. The woods his father lives in are thick and dense. It could have been 6 feet away from them and they would not have been able to see it, especially at night. They both agreed they would look around in the morning when the conditions were more suited in their favor. Now, the following day, September 5th, at about 10:30 a.m., it was the following morning after their encounter last night. They loaded their ATVs with their hunting rifles and set off to look for them. Ozzy had his Browning X-Bolt 308 Winchester rifle and his pistol he had mentioned earlier. His father brought his Remington Model 738 bolt-action 270 Winchester rifle along with his .357. He didn't want to take any chances of possibly being a big black bear, but they both knew it wasn't that. They just did not want to accept that yet. As they climbed a large hill on the back of the property, they noticed their tripod stand was knocked over. Now, they didn't think too much about it because they had had some bad storms earlier in the week and attributed it to the reason it tipped over. They set it back up and climbed the ladder to the top to get a better view. And they noticed that part of the fence was broken and laid on the ground, as if somebody put so much strain on it that it snapped. The ground was flattened in the area of the broken fence as if something had moved through it numerous times. Being distracted by the fence, Ozzy paid attention to his father until he got reticent. He spoke softly and told me to look at the tree about 25 yards in front of us and said this verbatim: "Something large and black is behind that tree, Oz." Oz, being his nickname due to his middle name being Ozzy, replied, "I can't see it all that well, but you got a better vantage point. What do you see?" He looks and focuses his vision. I mean, there are a lot of trees, and finding the right one was difficult until Ozzy found what he was looking, because he was looking right at it. And it was looking at him. Hiding behind the tree, it would peek its head out now and then, and he began to feel uneasy, but he also didn't feel threatened. It appeared more curious than aggressive, studying Ozzy and his father and waiting for them to make the first move. Ozzy was hoping it forgot the fact that they had shot at it the night before. I mean, it had every reason to hold a grudge and charge them. Perhaps it knew they were armed. Maybe it was studying them, waiting for an opening to leave or, worse, to attack. He couldn't tell you. All Ozzy knows is that once he realized what he was looking at, he informed his father about it. "Dad, it's a Bigfoot. I'm not losing my crap, right? You see it too." And he says it in the same tone he was speaking earlier. He didn't want to spook it. He looked over at him, and they both nodded in agreement. "Son, don't do anything dumb. We will lose this fight even with our firearms. Just stay calm and see what happens," Ozzy's father told him. And after what felt like an eternity, but in reality it was probably only 5 minutes or less, the Bigfoot walked out from behind the tree, disappearing into the woods it calls home. Ozzy and his father slid down the ladder and ran towards the ATV. They parked them only about 150 yards away. He jumps on it, his dad follows suit, and jumps on his. They left towards the house and both go inside. And they're both pale-faced, with his father sitting down, shaking from fear and or shock. If he was feeling the same as Ozzy was, it was a combination of both. They didn't say anything for a few minutes until Ozzy said, "Dad, what do we do about this?" And his father simply retorts, "It's bigger, faster, and more than likely smarter. Chances of it staying around here is low." And they left it at that. They had heard whooping the next day, but they never saw nor heard it again after this. And now, Ozzy always visits that area of the property whenever he goes to see his father, just to see if it may come back. I mean, it's been almost 3 years, and they have both seen zero signs. Maybe one day they'll see it again. Our fourth and final story of the day comes from Kevin. They've been deciding to share their camping nightmare from almost 11 years ago that was honestly the most frightening experience of their lives. They are currently living in Arlington, Washington. This is easily the most condensed version. They were visiting from Indiana, and their girlfriend and 3 of their friends went camping near the ice caves. The usual camping spots they usually went to were full, so they were forced to go to the top of the mountain loop and camp at a site they had never been to. No one felt very secure with this fact, and all of them were kind of on edge from it. It just didn't feel right. His girlfriend and her friend are professional psychic energy workers, so when they say something does not feel right, there's a reason for that. They did not ignore this. They were all on high alert, and for good reason. They were going to find out soon. Later in the evening, after they had all retired to their tents, Kevin's girlfriend and him noticed a very bright light shining on their tent. She looks out the small top window of the tent and sees a light at the top of the trees shining upwards. They both look up and saw the same thing, trying to figure out what it was. They quickly get out of their tent to investigate this strange phenomena. Their friends had done the same. Now, all their minds were trying to make logical sense of this. I mean, how do you do that? Like a ranger, a good old boys club, or something that made sense. There was no sound, no motor, no humming. It was the strangest experience they'd ever had. The light source was a UFO hovering on the side of the mountain. It was so bright that it illuminated the whole side. They all gazed in at wonder. Then, they all promptly turned and went single file straight back inside their tents without saying a word. They did not discuss anything, even though they thought it was weird to do this after seeing a real UFO. Then they went to sleep. It was like they had no control over their bodies or minds. If you knew them, you would know this is the last thing they would normally have done. They were all sort of a rebel without a cause type of people. Very not your run-of-the-mill, if that's not obvious with his girlfriend and her friend's occupation. They talked to the dead, not aliens per se, so this was a whole new area for them too. They are all very willful, strong individuals with minds of their own, so this behavior from them at the time was as odd as the UFO in the sky. They woke up bright and early and felt odd. It seemed like the night passed instantly and it was the next morning. The following morning, strange things started to occur. They tried to start a fire in their fire pit nearest their tent, and even with an accelerant, it would flare up and instantly get snuffed out by some mysterious source. Also, they both got this feeling of something that they could not physically see creeping up on their backs whenever they tried to enter their tent. That went on the whole day, and later on, around 4 or 5 p.m., the three of them had walked to the outhouse, Kevin's girlfriend and her friend, and also Kevin. It was a short walk, maybe a quarter mile or so away. Walking, they kept hearing something on the tree line matching their pace. They would all stop to investigate, and all the trees looked the same. That was this ashen grayish white color that stood out. They noted it and walked on to have the footsteps in the tree line start again. They stopped again, and yet again the trees all looked the same, except one was pale like the last one he described. But when they looked back to where the last pale tree should have been, it was gone. And this repeated about 4 more times, and it clearly unnerved all of them. They all had an inner knowing not to make it obvious that they were aware of its presence. His girlfriend informed him, Kevin's girlfriend, later that she had seen something in the trees that had a blurry kind of camouflage, like you see the predator have in the movies. It appeared to her to look exactly like the predator, something that was camouflaged, besides the area being oddly quieter than it should have been. One of the bizarre parts was the silence. There were no bugs, birds, or deer, and they were in the forest. There were no critters or animals around. That is very strange and frightening. Anything they had read said that it is not a good sign and odd things are happening. So they were ready to leave, and to be honest, the rest of the day into the evening went okay. Later that evening, when they had retired to their tents, their true terror began. So you can get a visual. Their mattress was extra thick, so they were like 2 or 3 feet off the ground, and their heads were right against the tent fabric, which is a horrifying realization. Anyway, the crew laid down for the evening at the same time, and they lay there relaxing, thinking of all the strange happenings over the course of the weekend. Something with a very bulbous head had pushed into the tent between their heads and growled an unearthly growl reminiscent of how the predators sound. He froze, and his girlfriend gave Kevin a terrified look, passed out from fear alone. Kevin only was equipped with a pocket knife for protection. That's not going to do anything. He was terrified. He knew it wasn't anything known to this world, and so he lay there for an eternity hoping this thing had gone away, and to his horror, he saw it push into the tent mere inches away from his head. It growls again even more loudly, as unbelievable as it might sound. He did what first came to mind and said in a firm voice but polite voice, "We're not bothering you. Would you please go bother somebody else?" It then drew its head back from their tent, and after about 15 seconds, they heard it walk away on 2 legs. Kevin's girlfriend woke up as it was walking away, and they were both terrified it would go after their friends or even come back. But it didn't. And at daybreak, when everyone woke up, there was a mutual demand to leave and found no resistance with anyone. They packed up, leaving as fast as they could, and they were all avid campers up until this trip. Not one of them has been back at camping since. It's kind of scarred them. They've never shared this story because they figured nobody would believe it. Or worse yet, somebody would want to go camping there. But the real question here is, what do you guys think of Kevin's story? Personally, from all the Bigfoot and strange UFO stories that I've read, a lot of the supernatural phenomena involved in this story does have some sort of correlation that it sounds, but it's hard to pinpoint what exactly. And it is very possible that Kevin's story could be completely genuine, especially considering the feeling of the negative energy at the beginning of the story. That kind of gave some insight into what was to come. But more importantly, I want to hear what you guys think. So be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below. I want to know. And as always, guys, be sure to go ahead and smack that like button. And if you're new to the channel, I hope you enjoy the content, because if you do, I release storytelling of the mysterious and supernatural. Just go ahead and smash that subscribe button. And be sure to keep an open mind. I love you all, and I'll see you guys in the very next video.